Welcome to Life of Jesus. History is usually shaped by kings, generals, and powerful leaders. But when Jesus Christ began his mission to change the world, he did not go to palaces or places of influence. He did not seek scholars, priests, or men trained in power. Instead, he walked along ordinary roads, beside a quiet lake, and spoke to ordinary people living ordinary lives. Fishermen repairing their nets, a tax collector sitting at his booth, men who were overlooked, underestimated, and forgotten by society. These men would become known as the 12 disciples. They were not chosen because they were extraordinary. They became extraordinary because they were chosen. Today, we explore the calling of the 12 disciples, how Jesus called them, who they were, and why their calling still matters today. This is not just a story about 12 men from the past. It is a story about what happens when God calls ordinary people to an extraordinary purpose. To understand their calling, we must first understand the world they lived in. First-century Judea and Galilee were under Roman occupation. The Jewish people lived under heavy taxation, strict laws, and constant military presence. Roman soldiers walked their streets. Roman governors controlled their land. Freedom was a distant memory. Many Jews longed for a Messiah, a powerful leader who would overthrow Rome and restore Israel's glory. They expected a warrior king, not a humble teacher. Religious life was centered around the synagogue and the temple in Jerusalem. Rabbis gathered disciples, but the system worked in a specific way. Students chose a rabbi, not the other way around. Only the best, the brightest, and the most educated were accepted. Jesus turned this system upside down. He did not wait for disciples to come to him. He went out and chose them himself. And he did not choose the elite. He chose the ordinary. The Gospel of Matthew tells us that as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were fishermen, casting their nets into the water. Fishing was hard work. It required long hours, physical strength, and patience. Many nights ended with empty nets and aching bodies. Fishing was not a glamorous job. It was survival. Jesus looked at them and said something simple, yet life-changing. "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." There was no explanation, no promise of wealth, no guarantee of safety. And yet, immediately, they left their nets and followed him. Those nets represented their livelihood, their security, their identity. Leaving them meant stepping into uncertainty. It meant trusting a man they barely knew. But something about Jesus' voice carried authority, truth, and purpose. A little farther along the shore, Jesus saw James and John, the sons of Zebedee. They were in a boat with their father, repairing their nets. Jesus called them as well. And without hesitation, they left the boat, left their father, and followed him. In just a few moments, for ordinary fishermen had their lives completely redirected. Why fishermen? Because fishermen understood patience. They understood failure. They understood persistence. They knew what it meant to work all night and catch nothing. They knew how to wait, how to trust timing, and how to work together. Jesus was not looking for perfection. He was looking for willingness. Among these first disciples was Simon, later called Peter. Peter was passionate, outspoken, and impulsive. He spoke before thinking. He acted before understanding. He would one day walk on water in faith, and moments later sink in fear. Yet Jesus chose him. Jesus did not choose Peter because he was strong. He chose Peter because he was sincere. Jesus saw not who Peter was, but who Peter would become. Andrew, Peter's brother, was different. He was quieter, less visible, but deeply faithful. Andrew is often remembered not for speeches or bold actions, but for bringing people to Jesus. He brought Peter to Jesus. He brought the boy with the loaves and fish. He brought others quietly, faithfully. Not all disciples lead loudly. Some lead by simply pointing others to Christ. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were known for their intensity. Jesus would later call them sons of thunder. They were ambitious, passionate, and at times impulsive. They once asked Jesus for seats of honor beside him in glory. They once wanted to call down fire from heaven on a village that rejected him. And yet, one of them, John, would become known as the disciple of love. Jesus did not reject their passion. He refined it. This is how Jesus works. He does not erase who we are. He transforms it. As Jesus continued his ministry, he called more disciples. One of the most shocking was Matthew, also known as Levi. Matthew was a tax collector. Tax collectors were hated. They worked for Rome, collected money from their own people, and often overcharged for personal profit. To the Jewish community, tax collectors were traitors and sinners. Jesus saw Matthew sitting at his tax booth and said 2 words, "Follow me." Matthew stood up, left everything, and followed him. This single moment would have stunned everyone watching. A rabbi choosing a tax collector was unthinkable. But Jesus did not see Matthew as society saw him. He saw a man in need of grace. Matthew would later write one of the Gospels, preserving the story of Jesus for generations to come. Grace changes everything. Jesus also called men like Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, James son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot. Simon the Zealot was particularly interesting. Zealots were political radicals who opposed Roman rule and sometimes used violence. A zealot and a tax collector would normally be enemies. Yet Jesus called them both. In his group of 12, enemies became brothers. This was not accidental. Jesus was forming a new kind of kingdom, one not built on politics, violence, or power, but on humility, service, and love. And then there was Judas Iscariot. Jesus knew who Judas was. He knew what Judas would do, and still he called him. This reminds us that being chosen does not remove free will. Calling does not guarantee faithfulness. The calling of the 12 was not about perfection. It was about presence. Jesus invited them to walk with him, to learn from him, to be transformed by him. They did not fully understand who he was. They would doubt, argue, misunderstand, and fail. Yet Jesus remained patient. Because calling is a process. Jesus did not call the disciples all at once in a single moment. Their calling unfolded over time. They walked with him, listened to him teach, watched him heal, and slowly began to understand that this was no ordinary rabbi. After a period of ministry, prayer, and growing public attention, Jesus made a deliberate and significant decision. The Gospel of Luke tells us that Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray, and he spent the entire night in prayer to God. This detail matters. Before choosing the 12, Jesus prayed all night. Even though he was the Son of God, he sought the Father's will. He did not rush the decision. He did not choose impulsively. The calling of the 12 was intentional, prayerful, and purposeful. When morning came, Jesus called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. This moment marked a transition. Up until now, many people followed Jesus. Crowds gathered to hear him teach and see his miracles. But from among the many, Jesus selected 12 to be especially close to him. These 12 would not just follow. They would be sent. The word apostle means one who is sent. These men would become witnesses, messengers, and foundations of the early church. Jesus named them one by one. Simon, whom he named Peter, Andrew, Peter's brother, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James son of Alphaeus, Simon who was called the Zealot, Judas son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who later became a traitor. Each name represents a story. Each life represents a calling. Each calling represents grace. Jesus did not choose these men because they were flawless. He chose them because they were willing to be shaped. From that moment on, their lives were no longer their own. They followed Jesus everywhere. They walked with him from village to village. They listened as he taught crowds. They watched as he healed the sick, gave sight to the blind, and raised the dead. They witnessed authority unlike anything they had ever seen. But they also saw rejection. They saw religious leaders challenge him. They saw towns turn him away. They saw threats grow louder. Following Jesus was not glamorous. It was uncertain, uncomfortable, and often dangerous. Jesus did not hide this reality from them. He told them plainly that following him would require sacrifice. He told them they would be hated. He told them they would be persecuted. He told them they would suffer. And still, they stayed. Not because they fully understood, but because they trusted him. As they walked with Jesus, he did not treat them as passive observers. He involved them. He asked them questions. He challenged their assumptions. He corrected their pride. He exposed their fear. When they argued over who was the greatest, Jesus humbled them. When they misunderstood his teachings, Jesus patiently explained. When they failed, Jesus restored them. He taught them not just through words, but through example. They watched him touch lepers. They watched him eat with sinners. They watched him forgive enemies. They watched him serve instead of demand. Slowly, their understanding grew. Yet they still struggled. Thomas doubted. Peter feared. James and John sought power. The others often failed to understand Jesus' mission. But Jesus never abandoned them. Calling does not mean instant maturity. Calling begins a journey. At one point, Jesus sent the 12 out on their first mission. He gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal diseases. For the first time, they were not just following. They were participating. They preached repentance. They healed the sick. They experienced God working through them. This mission taught them dependence. Jesus told them not to take extra money, food, or supplies. They had to trust God to provide. They learned that the power was not in themselves, but in the one who sent them. When they returned, they were amazed. They had seen lives changed. They had experienced the reality of God's kingdom. But even then, Jesus reminded them that their joy should not come from power or success, but from knowing God. As time passed, the disciples grew closer to Jesus, but the tension around him increased. Religious leaders plotted. Crowds misunderstood. Expectations clashed. The disciples still hoped for a political Messiah. They expected Jesus to rise to power, defeat Rome, and establish a kingdom on earth. But Jesus spoke of suffering. He spoke of rejection. He spoke of death. This confused them. How could the Messiah suffer? How could the king be crucified? They did not yet understand that the greatest victory would come through sacrifice. And still, Jesus walked ahead of them, patient and steady, because their calling was not finished. As Jesus continued toward Jerusalem, the tone of his ministry changed. The crowds still followed him, but opposition grew stronger. Religious leaders watched closely, looking for reasons to accuse him. The disciples could sense that something was coming, even if they did not fully understand what it would be. Jesus began to speak more openly about his suffering. He told them that he would be betrayed, that he would be arrested, that he would be killed. These words disturbed them deeply. Peter, ever bold, pulled Jesus aside and rebuked him. He could not accept a suffering Messiah. To Peter, suffering meant failure. But Jesus responded firmly, reminding him that God's plans do not follow human expectations. This moment revealed something important about the disciples. They loved Jesus, but they still saw the world through human ambition, fear, and misunderstanding. Calling does not remove weakness. It exposes it. As they entered Jerusalem, hopes surged again. Crowds welcomed Jesus with palm branches, shouting praise. The disciples may have thought, finally, this is it. But instead of taking power, Jesus spoke of humility. Instead of claiming authority, he washed his disciples' feet. This act shocked them. Foot washing was the work of servants, not teachers. Yet Jesus knelt before each of them, including Judas, and washed their feet. In that moment, Jesus redefined leadership. Greatness was not dominance. Greatness was service. That same night, everything unraveled. Jesus shared a final meal with his disciples. He spoke of betrayal, of suffering, of sacrifice. Confusion filled the room. Peter declared that he would never abandon Jesus. He swore loyalty even unto death. Jesus looked at him with compassion and said that before the rooster crowed, Peter would deny him 3 times. Peter could not believe it, but Jesus knew. Later that night, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus asked his disciples to stay awake and pray with him. They fell asleep. 3 times, Jesus returned and found them sleeping. Fear weighed heavy. Exhaustion overtook them. When the moment came, they were not ready. Judas arrived with soldiers. A kiss marked betrayal. Jesus was arrested, and the disciples scattered. Peter followed at a distance. In the courtyard, as Jesus was questioned, Peter was recognized. 3 times, he denied knowing Jesus. The rooster crowed. Peter remembered Jesus' words, and he wept bitterly. The disciples who had left everything to follow Jesus now stood broken, afraid, and ashamed. Judas, overwhelmed by guilt, would later take his own life. From a human perspective, the calling of the 12 looked like a failure. One betrayed, one denied, the rest fled. But God's story was not finished. Jesus was crucified. Hope seemed lost. The disciples hid behind locked doors, fearing they would be next. Everything they believed seemed shattered. But then came the resurrection. Jesus appeared to them alive. Fear turned into amazement. Shame turned into joy. Despair turned into hope. Jesus did not return with anger. He returned with peace. He spoke their names. He ate with them. He walked with them again. And most importantly, he restored them. Peter, the one who denied him, was restored by the sea where he had first been called. 3 times, Jesus asked him if he loved him. 3 times, Peter said yes. And 3 times, Jesus entrusted him with responsibility. Feed my sheep. The calling had not been canceled. Failure had not disqualified them. Grace had rewritten their story. Before ascending to heaven, Jesus gave them their final commission. They were to go into all the world, to preach the gospel, to make disciples of all nations. These men who once feared fishermen, tax collectors, doubters, and sinners were now entrusted with the greatest mission in history. The Holy Spirit would empower them, and they would change the world. The calling of the 12 was never just about them. It was about what God could do through ordinary people who were willing to follow. Jesus did not choose scholars from elite schools. He did not choose religious leaders with influence and status. He chose fishermen, a tax collector, a political radical, and men with doubts, tempers, and fears. This was intentional, because the power of the message would never rest in the messengers. It would rest in God. The disciples were not called because they were ready. They were called because they were willing. They did not understand everything at the beginning. They made mistakes. They failed publicly. They doubted. They feared. And still, Jesus called them. This truth remains just as powerful today. God does not wait for perfection before calling someone. He calls, and then he shapes. The journey of the disciples reminds us that growth takes time. Faith is not instant clarity. Faith is choosing to follow even when understanding comes slowly. The disciples learned by walking with Jesus day after day. They learned through obedience. They learned through failure. They learned through grace. And when they were finally empowered by the Holy Spirit, they became something they never could have been on their own. They became witnesses. Men who once hid behind locked doors now preached boldly in public. Men who once feared rejection now faced persecution without silence. Men who once doubted now laid down their lives for the truth they had seen. Almost all of the 12 would suffer and die for their faith, not because they were forced, but because they were convinced. They had walked with Jesus. They had seen him risen. They knew the truth, and they could not remain silent. The calling of the 12 reminds us that following Jesus is not about comfort. It is about transformation. It is not about power. It is about service. It is not about status. It is about surrender. Jesus still calls people today, not always to leave their jobs or homes, but to leave behind fear, pride, and self-reliance. He calls people to love deeply, to forgive freely, to serve humbly, to trust completely. The same voice that called Peter from his nets calls hearts today. Follow me. And just like the disciples, the invitation is not a promise of ease. It is a promise of purpose. If God could use 12 ordinary men to change the course of history, then no life is too small, too broken, or too ordinary to be used by him. The calling of the 12 is proof that God's kingdom is built through obedience, faith, and grace. And it all begins with a simple response. Yes,